How do you mute? I feel like muting is like
There we go.
All right. I'm gonna start now. I've started the recording. Um, Thank you all for coming. Um, so I'm gonna start off by actually reading um what I posted about last week. Because I think it will actually be a good segue and setup for tonight. Um, so I said that I don't think I did a good job of connecting my ideas together. One point that I missed was that the serpent's curse was that he lost the ability to walk. Therefore, he cannot walk with God. Therefore, he cannot exalt in monotony. Um, Remember that exalt in monotony idea came from the Chesterton quote, and I also want to link that with what I've said before about that the meaning of life is fellowship with God and others in creation, right? Like that's what those things are. And if that's like the meaning of life, like if like his like the serpent's curse is that he can't engage with the meaning of life. He cannot be happy with things as they are. They cannot just be good. Um, if you ever hear someone say, "I think heaven would be boring," this is the serpent speaking because he can't be happy with things as they are. He needs things to progress, to become different. As we go forward from here, time and progression in human history begins. But the question is progressing to what? As we go forward, we will begin to see the tension between these ideas and how God will start to use time as a weapon. And I wanted to kind of highlight that idea of that the story of like what's going on here is there's this feedback that's going on. Like God is doing something and then people respond. And one of the things that we'll continuously see, and we'll see a different version of this today in Genesis 4. Um, but it uh, and it hasn't happened yet, but it will happen. Of God introduces technology, and God introduces something that's meant for protection, but then man will use that and reverse that and start to um, use it as a tool for power and as a tool for attacking others. And and so there's this reversal of what God is trying to do. But then in return, God will also start to do a reversal of things that the enemy is doing. And so the enemy is introducing this this state of time and progression. And what's going to happen is that God will end up using that and reverse that. We'll start to use that as a weapon. And this shouldn't be a crazy idea because we're all familiar with Jesus. And what happens there is, right, like the enemy tries to use death, and God uses that death actually as a reversal of death. And so this isn't a crazy idea. And I'm just trying to highlight the fact that that it shouldn't be a crazy idea because we already have that, but also like it shouldn't be a crazy idea that we think that that's what's going on in the passage story because it is what God is doing all along through um, time and in the Bible, right? Um, and and so what's happening here is we're having um, this kind of rotation, and I mean maybe people would want to get mad at me about this, but this is similar to like it's a yin yang idea, right? Darkness and then light, darkness and then light, darkness and then light, darkness and light, and it's a rotation, right? And so it's cyclical, but it's it's not merely cyclical, right? We don't we don't believe in like just Ragnarok, right? We don't believe in like the cycle of worlds, right? Reincarnation, all this stuff. Like that's not what we're doing. There's a cycle, but there's also a progression, right? And so, um, uh, the reason why I had the Gurren Lagann here thing is that like a cycle that's progressing. That's a drill. That's like what a drill is. And so um, I'll let people look up that anime in their own time. I won't dwell on that. So for tonight, um, I am not sure if this is going to be a two-parter or a one-parter. Um, I I really wanted to do it in one part because I I'm not sure that I can really justify a full lesson on just the second half here. But I'm just gonna read the first half and we'll see how it goes. If I can do it fast enough, I'll do the whole thing. If not, uh, maybe next time we'll do like kind of a half-half thing, and might even do like a recap on some of the discussion questions or something, which was an idea that I wanted to do with Evan, but maybe we'll just do it as a whole group. I'm not sure. Um, so Genesis 4. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock, and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door. It is a desire for you. You must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord God said to Cain, Where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Okay. All right. So Adam knew Eve, right? I can't help, right? Like I think that there should be a right. This is a Jewish idiom, right, for having sex, but I think that it should be obvious that this has um, a connection to um, the knowledge of good and evil, right? Like there's to me it seems obvious that there's some kind of an idea of even though God gave the command to be fruitful and multiply before the fall, that in some ways it couldn't really happen or be instantiated until after the fall. I don't fully know what the connection is, and a lot of what we're going to end up saying, what I'm going to end up saying on chapter 4, is a lot of just hey, notice these connections, but I don't have full um, like a lesson or teaching with each of them. I'm just going to try and say, hey, there's something here. Pay attention to it. And I'm going to try and say that about a bunch of things that you may not have noticed the first time reading it. So the obvious thing that kind of everybody talks about is, okay, what's going on with the difference in their offerings? Um, and a lot of people will say that, okay, uh, it's simply because Abel is bringing a life, and therefore, like is bringing a creature and is bringing an animal, and so animal offerings are inherently better than like fruit and grain offerings, and that might be true. We see some. So the correct answer is that we don't really know what the difference is here between like why is God liking Abel's and not liking Cain's. So a couple of different things is one, just the nature of what the offering is could be what it is. Some evidence for that is that uh, does seem to be this like tendency in the Levitical law where um, animal sacrifices do seem to generally be better than like fruit and grain sacrifices, and also the bigger the animal, the better. So like a boar is better than like a goat, which is better than like doves, right? And it goes down like that. And then there's a provision in some places where like if you're poor and you can't afford like a goat or one of those other things, you can bring a grain offering as a replacement. And so there's this idea of like, okay, they're not quite as good as those. So that's a possibility. There's also the possibility of the difference being that Abel brings the firstborn of his flock. So there's an order to the increase that Abel has, and so Abel gives the first, whereas I don't know what that.
Bryce, you gotta tell me this stuff.
Dad, I didn't know.
Well, I don't know either. Okay, do we owe her the money?
So oh,
Well, I can't pay till next week.
Oh, sorry. Hold on one
yeah,
second.
we can hear you.
Sorry, drama over here.
Yeah, there's
Drama
drama
over
over here too. I think my Roomba is going crazy. So I don't know what that is. Uh, what was I saying? Oh, whereas Cain, is just giving some of his fruit. So so there's the idea of maybe Cain is not giving his best, right? Um, there's all of these different kind of ideas. Uh, but to me, that actually doesn't really matter. Because as we'll see here in a second, for like what God's response is, God's God doesn't. It's not like God doesn't like the it never says that God doesn't like Cain's offering. Um, what the idea is that Cain's offering is seen as inferior to Abel's, but God's stance is more neutral on it. And one of the things that I want to highlight in this whole entire section, and it's going to keep coming up, and it's going to keep coming up for a while, is all of the talk that um, is happening in referring to people's faces. So pay attention to that, and this is one of the areas where I think the Step Bible will really help you with that, right? So if you're just doing it in English, right, you see this: Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen?" Um, but actually, whenever it says, "And the Lord has regard for," right? Um, regard means where's it at? Yeah, yeah. There we go. Okay. So regard means to look at, right? And so there's all of this uh directionality in the language that's going on here. And one of the things that I want to tie into that is this idea, which is a Michael Heiser idea, that a lot of times in Christianity we think of the fall as being a single event that causes everything else, but really the early stories of Genesis is these series of falls, right? And so this is where the web camera actually helps, right? So like a series of falls and a series of ups and downs, right? That is like what I was saying before of it's like a drill going down, and eventually what's going to happen, spoiler alert, there's going to be a series of falls but redemptions that go back up the other way, right? um but so what's happening here, and so also with this is the idea of um uh what we'll end up seeing is that there's kind of an idiom where it says that like if you like God showing you his face is the same thing as you being successful. um like success and and being before the face of the Lord, those are like this, those are the same thing. Okay. um and they are not necessarily tied to righteousness. And this is super important, right? Because this is essentially like what the whole like book of Job is about, right? Of like on one hand, we're concerned about material success and how good we're doing, whereas God is concerned about what is what is your relationship with me, and in a what are your moral stances, right? Like how are you holding up morally, right? And you can see this disconnect in Cain is angry because he seems to not be having success as a result of the sacrifice that he made. Like that's what this means. Like how would Cain even know that the Lord didn't have regard for his offering, right? It had to like they would have measured that in material success and whatever is going on. So maybe he's been making these um, he's been making these offerings of grain, and it seems like his next harvest or whatever it isn't as large as like he intended or something like that. Something like that is going along the lines, right? They're tying it to success. But God, right? He asks, "Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted?" So I love this line, um, because uh, if you argue with an atheist on Reddit, it will always come up of this idea of, well, why do we need all of these rules? Why do we need to have these rules specified? Why do we need to why do we need to follow the Ten Commandments? Why do we need to follow the Bible? Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to do that? And the truth is of the Bible very early on, you don't really have to. Um, you can just do good, right? You can just do good, right? And I don't know how many different debates with atheists I've seen over the years where they're like, "Oh, atheists can be moral," like, and it's like, yeah, they can go for it, just do good. And almost inevitably, all those people that you're like, "Oh, just go do good, be a good person," like none of them succeed at it. It was one of the things that actually I think it was just this morning. Like Trent Horn just released. He's a Catholic guy. He released a video where he's talking about all these different famous atheists, that are on YouTube now, Destiny and all this stuff. Um, uh, and how all of them, how seemingly all of them have some very strange like immoral, I, I, degenerate behavior that they're a part of, and that they engage in. And it's kind of like, well, to me, I started thinking, I'm like, well, like, yeah, of of course it is. I mean, it kind of becomes this thing of like, if you don't believe in a higher power, if you don't believe in something that you need to be in relationship with, why not just do like whatever? Like that's like the whole point. And so even if you don't do that, it's almost like, well, if you're just being good, then you're kind of like wasting your time, right? And so it seems obvious that that's why it's going to then lead into this next thing of, if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, its desires for you, and um, you must rule over it. Very famously, if you watch Jordan Peterson's discussion of this chapter, he'll talk about how this its desire is for you is uh, it is like a it's a sexual desire, and so like sin is crouching like a lion at your door, and it wants to like mate with you. And to me, that idea is that like when you sin and whenever you invite sin in, um it's not just that sin that that's the issue. The issue is that it births new, deeper, darker things inside of you, right? um and right, this seems, I mean, this isn't a crazy idea, right? Everybody knows, like, if you um like, right, there are gateway drugs, right? The small drugs are gateway to bigger drugs, and there are gateway sins, right? Like you do the small sins, you justify them, and then you start this spiraling down, and you get worse and worse and worse, right? You don't start off as you don't start off as the school shooter. You start off as the person that's ruminating about these things in their room in the darkness, right? Um, okay. Did I get all that? Yes. Um, oh, yes. Okay. So then Cain spoke up to his brother, spoke to his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up. So I want to talk a little bit about this word "rose up." If we do this bad boy, did that work? Or did that not work? That did not work. Let's just click that. You'll see here in like the word study, right? A lot of times it's used for establish, right? So I will establish my covenant with you. And so this rise up, right? It's it's my goal. So I think I mentioned it last week, but one of the things that we'll end up seeing, right? Is, so we're having these falls. Something needs to be done to correct the fall, right? And so something needs to be done to go back up. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be two different options for going back up. One way to go back up is to make a name for yourself. The other way to go back up is to follow the name, which is Hashem, which is God. And you're going to see these competing paths, okay? And so Cain rising up against his brother is right. He's yes, he's rising up to kill his brother, but he is establishing um a power dynamic, right? And one of the things that we'll see with power dynamics, power hierarchies, it, governments, right? What's going to happen is those governments are going to be how we see um, those two paths play out. And there's going to be a system that God forms, and there's going to be a system that man forms, and you're going to have systems of God going against systems of man. And rising up and murdering just murdering your brother is a system that man uses, right? And so the argument that I'm making is that Cain killing his brother is basically the same thing as establishing a government, which is a very libertarian notion. And so it shouldn't be surprising that the end result of Cain rising up to kill his brother is the establishment of a city. Like those two things are connected. Okay. Okay. Then the Lord said, so where is your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Okay. So the interesting thing about this passage is where it says, am I my brother's keeper? The Lord's response is, what have you done? And so by saying that, the implicit answer to some degree is, yeah, actually, like you kind of are your brother's keeper. There is a level of responsibility that you owe that you owe to one another. To me, this is one of the things where if you were to like map this onto modern day issues, modern day problems, right? Right, like to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And saying that there are historical injustices, right? And it's like, well, yeah, like how did America establish our government? We fought a war, right? And actually, basically all governments are established by fighting a war, by one group rising up and killing another group, and that causes problems. And there are historical injustices, and is there a level of responsibility that we hold to one another? And the argument that I would say is that yeah, actually there is some kind of level of responsibility, and part of the way that I would argue that it transcends us is because of this idea right here, where it says, "The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." So there's this idea that the sin, right? It like everything wrong is done. It goes into the earth, and it stays there, and it builds, right? And actually, we'll see this, right? Because in a couple chapters, there's going to be a flood, and one of the things was whenever I was a kid, right, and you hear about, oh, why did the flood occur? Usually people will say, well, the flood occurred because everybody was just sinning and everybody was really bad. That's not actually what the text says. What the text says is that there was an outcry because of all of the violence from the land. There was an outcry from basically the blood and the ground. And so this is the beginning stages of that buildup, right? And what we'll see is that that buildup of sin is going to require some kind of reset, some kind of release, some kind of rest. Um, well, I'm using all those words for intentional reasons, right? And to bring it back to that modern example, right? You then get to a point of like, well, how do we do that? Jesus, um, that's how you account for all of that stuff, right? You have to have some kind of reset and rest. Okay. I also want to point out to you now. Okay, so and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield you its strength. You are a fugitive and wander on the earth. We'll come back to that word wander. Cain said to my Lord, my punishment is greater than I know. Behold, you have driven me away from the ground. Okay, so remember, God has already driven them away from the garden, and now he is driving Cain away from the ground. And what it says here is the panah, the face of the adamah, the soil, right? So, it does that thing where whenever you click on it, like it highlights other places where it says it. Everywhere here, it's just soil, adamah, adamah, right? But here, it's you have driven me away from the face of the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden, right? And so, Cain is now describing his curse as okay. Well, man's curse was that he was driven away from Eden and to work the ground, but now he's being even driven away further from the ground. He's being driven away from the face of the ground and from God's face, right? And so, like, where's he at? He's kind of nowhere, right? And that's where we get this idea of the wanderer, right? One of the things that I would hope that you notice is whenever I click on the word wanderer, it also highlights nod, right? And it's because like you can see the letters there and the letters there, they're like the same. It's nud, right? And so it's just there's just a slight change in how the vowels work. I also want to connect this idea of wanderer with the word Hebrew. The definition of the word Hebrew is the one who crosses or is wandering. And I want to connect that idea with the idea of sojourning, right? And whenever we get to Abraham, it's going to talk about Abraham as a sojourner. And so what I'm kind of making the argument here is Cain is kind of acting as like the first Hebrew kind of person without land, right? Which ironically, the first thing that he does is he settles in one place. Um, that dichotomy is funny to me. I also
Carl,
Yeah, go for it.
I have a question for you because I thought this is an interesting topic. Like what you're saying is interesting to me because my mom just went to Africa and she like met with like the local indigenous people to that area, and they're still very tribal.
Yes.
And one of the things that she learned was that there's a handful of different tribes or people groups. They stay in kind of a certain territory, but they roam around
Yes.
and they don't actually bring any value to the land. So the local farmers and like the local people actually hate them because they just take,
Yes.
and they're not actually bringing any value. So I thought that was interesting. This just the correlation.
Yeah, there's an argument that can be made that one of the things that's sort of going on here is this competition between um agricultural societies and like nomadic societies, um and or nomadic societies and like herding groups, right? And one of the things that we'll see with Abraham is Abraham is essentially like a herder, right? He takes his flocks and he moves them all around, right? um and it's not strictly that one is good and one is bad, um but um there is kind of an acknowledgement of a competition that is going on between them, and uh, and actually we'll get to that even kind of in the sort of the next chapter, or not the next chapter but the next paragraph. um yeah, well,
I want to add
go for it.
that the chapter in the language of creation that I just took pictures of and put those pictures into the Classroom One chat mentioned that topic as the relationship between the nomadic herder and the agricultural farmer. Um, and it brings up as I mentioned, there's a lot of other context that this section is towards the back of the book. So there's a lot of other context that would be missing from people for their understanding of what he's getting at.
Sure.
But there's a link to what Cain is doing as raising matter, as in growing plants and bringing it out of the earth, and also improperly raising matter and raising up against his brother Abel, in killing him. And that's also part of, as you mentioned, there's the link also into city founding, that
Yes.
gets into that as well. So all of those things are mentioned in that quick chapter. It's just a couple pages.
And so we have 20 minutes. I will try to do the entire second half, because it connects to those ideas a little bit that Evan just said. So Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered, I don't care. And Mehujael fathered Methushael, and whatever fathered Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of one was Adah, and the other was Zillah. Adah bore Jabal, and was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forager of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth was also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So we see that Cain has a son, and we see this idea. So there's a really important thing for people to get that is often missed when we read the Old Testament is this idea that a, a name can be an individual person, but it can also be a group of people. It can also be a city, and it can also be like a territory, an area, right? All of these things are connected. So, like, right, it might be like the land of Nod, but it might be called the land of Nod because it is the land where the wanderers are at, right? Um, and so this is why we get that Israel, right? I'm just gonna cheat and give you a spoiler alert. Israel is an individual, is a person. Israel is also a people group. Israel is also a country, right? It's all of these things together. Um, I want to highlight that the thing that takes place, right? So I mentioned before, right? So we have this establishment of a city, and then we have these establishments of technologies, right? And these technologies, in and of themselves, are not necessarily bad things, right? Who dwell in tents and have livestock. Cities are technology, instruments, and then instruments of bronze and iron. These should be thought of as instruments of war. Um, and but one of the things that we see is we have our first case of polygyny, right? So that's a man having multiple wives. Um, uh, Also, that's one of the new things that is popping up on the internet is people trying to claim that there's a form of Christian polygyny and arguing for it. Um, that is a great example of not understanding how to properly read the Bible. Just because the Bible describes something doesn't mean that the Bible is prescribing things. And one way to know what's the Bible's view on polygyny, show me like one example where the polygyny worked out in a good way. Pretty much all of them, there's very um, bad results from uh, uh, having more than one wife. There are situations where God redeems that situation, such as in the 12 tribes of Israel, because Jacob has multiple wives, and there are plenty of situations where God redeems that, but um, the whole reason why God needs to redeem it is because it's not working out. I also want to mention so Nama right here. So this woman occurs one time. And according to some traditions, this is the wife of Noah, right? So anytime that a word or name is only shows up once in the Bible, that is referred to as a I'm pretty sure it's Apex. Yeah, let's
Cal, is this like what about the whole 72 virgins thing?
Hapax
Is this
legomenon.
not in that chapter?
No, no. That shows up about 6 centuries later. Uh, actually, from this, possibly, depending upon how you do your dating, possibly 1,500 years later. Um, yeah. So th- those show up never. Um, Hapax
Hapax legomenon.
Hapax legomenon. That is a fancy word for a word that only appears once in the Bible. This is an example of that. But as I said before, I think it's safe to have an assumption that um, that the space in the Bible is limited, and so probably nothing is in there by mistake. There's probably a purpose for it, and so the purpose of this woman being mentioned, it makes sense that the purpose is that she is the wife of Noah, because one of the patterns that we will end up seeing is people kind of get mentioned and then they show up in the story later. One of the things that I also want to point this out and point this idea out that she is the wife of Noah is because is to contrast that with the line of Seth. So I talked before about how there's a path of people trying to build up a name for themselves, and there's a path of people trying to follow the name of the Lord. And we can see here that Cain's trajectory is people trying to build up a name for himself. That's literally what Lamech is doing here, right? Which we haven't talked about yet, but Lamech is boasting about himself, right? There's a line of people that become the fathers of all of these different technologies. And so it's easy to get the idea of, oh, Cain's line is the bad line, and Seth's line is the good line. The issue is that it's not as clean as that. And if in fact the daughter of Tubal Cain, or the sister of Tubal Cain, is the wife of Noah, what that means is that these two lines are actually interconnected. And that's super important. And this is a thing that actually will keep happening in the Old Testament. One of the things that's very interesting about Genesis is there are a bunch of random stories about women. Almost all of those random stories about women in the Old Testament are them doing this thing. It's almost always about a foreign woman that is going to get integrated into the quote unquote good line, right? That's what basically all of the stories are. Kind of the only one that I can think of. I mean, I could be corrected. The only one that's kind of divergent from that is maybe Esther. Esther is like a reverse of that, where she's in a foreign land. She's not a foreigner from Israel, right? She is an Israelite, but she's in a foreign land, and she has to figure out how to integrate with that culture.
I've got to leave, but I want to say one thing before I go, because it's probably not going to be a better time to say this. Another something interesting about the Lamech like proclamation that I hadn't seen anywhere until I had finished the book was this might be like a traditional understanding, but that what Lamech is mentioning there is the individuals that he killed, the man and the young boy,
young man,
is actually killing Cain, essentially in a hunting accident in which he mistakes Cain for an animal. Tubal Cain is the one with him. That's the young boy who he then kills in retaliation for having brought him out hunting with him and causing the mistake. So that's an interesting.
In language of creation.
Yeah, it is. So I wanted to
Is
say
that
that
a
mostly
is
just
that
because
a
I'd
is
never
that
heard.
like is that like a Talmud thing?
Might be.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly what it was, but he does mention that, like, okay, this is obviously not in the text,
Sure.
but you can tell that because of how short it is, this could be something that's fallen from the text, and now that's just a traditional thing. But that's just an interesting. It makes sense of why there'd be an amplification of the mark of Cain if that were true. That's all I wanted to say because I got to go.
Yeah, that's fine. But that does put me on the thing that I want to highlight about this is that amplification, is the growth of, okay, I'm going to, and notice that it's Lamech declaring it, right? It's not a thing that he gets from God. Cain gets it from God. Lamech takes the thing that was for Cain, and he amplifies it, right? And also, it should be pointed out. So I think there was an update to the Step Bible. The Step Bible used to do this thing where when you clicked on the name, it would give you the meaning of the name in Hebrew, and now it's just says like it's a person living and like doesn't give you the name in Hebrew. The names of Lamech's wife mean like ornament or adornment and like shade and or like shadow, right? And so they like have these negative there's like a negative connotation to their names. Um uh the other thing about this that I wanted to highlight is just the language around and he was the father of all of those who play the lyre and the pipe. This is so this has to be obvious that the idea here is that father is not to be like taken literally, right? Um, right? Like Evan plays the tuba, so Evan plays the pipe. Jubal is not his father, right? Um, this idea of the father of all those is that like he was the first and the others come after in some way, right? And this should be a thing that helps us for understanding of how the Bible is using this word in other locations where it should be seemingly obvious that there's not some kind of like direct line. And I'm thinking of all those. I'm thinking of locations like in the New Testament where it'll say like your father is Satan, right? um, uh, there and I like it should obviously not be taken as like a literal thing. It should be a descriptor of their actions, right? and and so because of that you shouldn't do things like what uh a lot of so I'll just throw it out there. What a lot of like Calvinists will try to do is be like, oh well, their father is Satan, therefore that means like they're not the elect, right? Like they can't just like change their father, right? Right. The Calvinists will a lot of times like to use the whole like sheep and goats passage and be like, oh, a sheep can't become a goat. They're from birth. They're different things. Um, and no, that's not what's going on. Whenever the Bible talks about these things, people have free will. The last thing that I want to mention is this here, where it says, "At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord." Um, I want to mention this because it is unclear if that is a positive thing or if that is a negative thing. And people will interpret that in different ways. Some people interpret it as, okay, the people that begin to call upon the name of the Lord are the people that are following in the line of Seth. This is like the quote unquote good line. And so they are trying to get back and establish a um, the connection to God. They are trying to follow, right? I talked before about those that try to follow the name, right? And I should go ahead and point out that the word for name in Hebrew is Shem, right? Um, and so that this could be a reference to uh, basically people that are doing that. But it could also be that people are doing that because things are getting bad, because we have people revenging people 77 fold, right? Perhaps we're starting some clan wars, we're starting some violence, right? And that's causing issues. Um, and it's and it could and so it could be a good response to, so it could be a strictly good thing, it could be a good response to a bad situation, or maybe it's an indication of how, right, we might say that people take the Lord's name in vain, right? Maybe it's a reference to how the fact that what Lamech is doing here is he has taken a thing that's from God and he is using it in a negative way. And so um, right, whenever he's doing this, is he invoking the name of the Lord, but is he doing it in a negative way? Um, there's kind of all of those options there. Um, I will finish with that. Were there any further questions, comments that people wanted to talk about?
I did have one question for you. The 77 times 70, obviously that's Jesus, something Jesus
Yep.
talks about later.
Yep. It's a
Um,
reversal of that. Yep.
yeah, so is it like because Lamech was like an increase of sin, it's almost like no matter how bad the offense is, like what's the exact, I guess, best way to put it?
Um, I think what's going on there is an example of what I said earlier about this. Sin is crouching at the door, and its desires for you, and you must rule over it. Lamech is excusing his sin, and that excuse for the sin amplifies it, right? And so um, that's what I think is going on here. I don't think that there's a necessarily strict well, this isn't something that I've talked about much in uh, I haven't talked about this much in this series, but I'll go ahead and discuss it. We haven't talked a lot about the symbolism of numbers, and how symbolism of numbers works in the Bible. Um, everybody pretty much knows that the that like 7 is God's number, right? A lot of people don't know why that is. It's pretty much it has to do with circles. Um, uh, so you know the number pi, right? So pi is 3.14, right? And a bunch of other numbers, right? If you double pi, so pi is half of a circle. If you double pi, you get a much better number, which is tau. Tau is 6.28 a bunch of numbers, right? And so tau is a full circle, right? So the reason why 7 is like God's perfect number is because if you're doing geometry, right? And specifically, whenever we say like pi is 3.14, what it is it's the length of the radius times that distance, right? And so like the way that you would make a circle, right, is you stake something in the ground, and then you go out some distance, and then you use that as an anchor point, and you loop around, right? Um, if you and then if you take that length and then you measure it for how you go around, you get that number. The reason why 7 is God's perfect number is because when man is using that measuring tool to measure around, we can't quite make it work. There's 6, and then there's a little bit of an extra remainder thing. And so this is why 7 is associated with God, because God can complete that circle. God knows what that distance is. God knows what that gap, and so 7 is associated with God. 6 is associated with mankind. This is why we get 666, right? So 6 is associated with man. Man doesn't know how to get between, doesn't know the right precise way to measure between 6 and 7. And so that's where you get that mysterious little extra part. And so this is why like this is why God tells David not to take a census, right? God says don't measure fully, right? And because the right, there's all these different things in the Old Testament that are about like don't measure fully, don't do that thing fully, don't collect all of the grain in the field, leave some at the edges for people to glean, right? There's all this kind of stuff, because that remainder needs to be there for the Lord. Okay, so that's where like 7 comes from. That's where 6. A different a different symbolic number is um like 10, right? And the reason why, and so 10 is like representative of like the works of man. And why is 10 representative of the works of man? You have 10 fingers, right? It's like what it is. So the reason why I'm kind of doing all that is because what I would argue is that the increase between 7-fold and 77-fold is a combination. It's a strange combination of, you take the 7, you multiply it by 10, like the work of men, you get 70, and you add them together, right? And so I would argue that like the symbolic thing that's going on here is, and usually symbolism isn't arbitrary. Usually symbolism is like, you kind of don't really, in my opinion, you often don't need to do a deep dive on the like numerical symbology that's going on in the Bible, because you can kind of just read the outside context of it, and you get like what it's saying, and or just compare it to other things like in the Bible of like where those numbers show up. And so, right, I would argue that the symbolic increase of what's going on there is just related to the fact of it's a thing that was instantiated by God, and now Lamech is applying his own power to take that tool that was being used by God, and he's going to use it as a tool to um, generate his own power and authority, right? Which is the thing that I already said. Um, did I kind of answer what you were? Did I
Yeah,
understand your
that
question?
was actually that was good. I've actually never heard any of that. So that's like that's very interesting. That's something I'm gonna have to think more about that because like that's
It will come up
there's a lot
more.
there.
It will come up more. We'll end up talking about it more, especially as we get to like later. I know it's a thing that I've mentioned in the Bible study in the past at different times. I think it came up some in the Mark Bible study. But yeah.
Is this like is this just Jewish scholarship? Is that how we're able to kind of source it, or is it just like making sense of what's in scripture, or is it like the Talmud, or
So it's a combination of things. So like the understanding about like of like the circle that you get a lot of that from like Greek stuff, right? Of what because that's what the Greeks were doing, right? They were all about like the mathematics and figuring out all of that stuff. But then so me personally, I'm getting a lot of that from like Jonathan Peugeot.
Ah,
And he's getting a lot of it from like uh because he's Eastern Orthodox, so he's getting it a lot from a bunch of various like church father figures and stuff. A lot of those different ideas. Um, and because he had a whole kick. Man, he hasn't talked about a lot of that stuff in like a number of years. You'd have to go back in his like timeline and like see where he's talking about like different numbers. He had a whole thing about like all these different numbers and like because there's symbolism for like the number 9. There's symbolism for the number 40, like in all of this stuff. And and usually a lot of it is like the symbolism is like uh combinations of things. And so like for the number 9, really number 9 is 3 groups of 3. Like that's what it is. And so like and it's also just you can see it just by how people like use it, right? So like the idea that like 7 is God's number and like 6 is man's, like we can see that from how scripture uses those 2 numbers, right? And so like there are 7 days in a week, um and there are 6 days that men work, right? There's 6 days that where men are productive, and there's this one mysterious day. There's one mysterious Sabbath day that like is God. It's supposed to be God's day, that
mhm.
you're not doing work, so you're not doing the things that man normally does, right? Um, and then you get a lot of this stuff with like um and a lot of like Second Temple like literature stuff. They go like off on all this stuff. I know like there's supposed to be a big thing for like the Essenes, like, and how like one of their big things was like how to do like calendars properly, and it had to do with like for like the Essenes, it was all about like that difference between like 6 and 7, and um like it, it's it goes for like how you break things up, and like I think there's I forget what it is, but like um if you like order your months in like perfect weeks, what you do is you'll get this like remainder of like 4 days or something like that. I'm making this up off the top of my head because I don't remember it, but it's something along these lines. um,
Huh.
and like the Essenes had this thing where it was like um the proper way to like organize your calendar was to have like all of this other stuff perfect, and then to have this big gap that was almost like a super Sabbath. It was like a 4-day like Sabbath, where you would have a festival, and if you just did that, like your year worked out like perfectly. Which obviously this is a thing that we still deal with today. Like that's why we have leap years, right? We have leap, and not only do we have leap years, we have like there are like leap years, there are leap like seconds, there are leap like minutes, like all this stuff. Like if you really get into like all this stuff about like trying to track like days and everything, you have to add in like all of these like leap things to account for that like mysterious extra like remainder about um about things. And so that's yeah, like that's where a lot of these ideas kind of come from, and of how we can understand it is we can see how people in the past were using and interacted with these numbers. That's what I would argue anyways.
It makes sense. I mean, the full circle makes sense. Even like what you were saying about the whole thing makes sense to me. Even the week, like you're not giving God his due day, and so it's 6 versus 7. Um, Fascinating. I know this is totally off topic, but I believe Nicholas Tesla was fascinated by the number 9, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Okay, anything else, because we've gone a little bit later than I intended, but that's okay. Oh, it's just yeah, well, I only had a couple of you today. But thank you. I am actually glad that I was able to do that full chapter. I think going forward for a while, um, I'll try to be doing whole chapters. Because like I think next week is, yeah, next week is just genealogy. So we're definitely going to spend 1 week on that. But thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Kyle.